Welcome to the deep dive. We're jumping straight into something, well, pretty critical that often gets missed, maybe in the celebrations after a big system go live, like a new ERP. What actually happens with all that enterprise data after the system is up and running?
Exactly. There's this huge sigh of relief. Everyone feels it when you hit go live. And honestly, you get why it's a massive undertaking. But the thing is, that moment, it isn't really the finish line for your data. It's more like the start of the next really crucial phase.
Right, that feeling of, whoo, we did it,
Yeah.
is so understandable. But if you don't have a solid plan for managing the data from that point on, like, you're almost asking for the old problems to creep back in.
Oh, absolutely. You start seeing data silos again, maybe inconsistencies in your records, reports that, well, people just don't trust anymore. And that brand new expensive system suddenly doesn't feel quite as smart as you thought it would.
And it can happen fast, can it?
Surprisingly fast. All that effort you put into cleaning and migrating data beforehand, it can get undermined pretty quickly by, new information coming in constantly, changing business rules, just the sheer volume of it all, if there's no real ongoing control.
And that really gets to the core of what we're talking about today. We're going deep on post-go-live data governance, why it's just become non-negotiable, and we're going to look specifically at how Infor is tackling this, especially after they acquired Albanero and really advanced their data mesh technology.
Yeah, that Albanero acquisition back in 2023, it wasn't just about Infor buying another piece of software. Albanero had this really specific, powerful background in master data management platforms, MDM platforms built for, the real complexity and scale of enterprise data. It really showed a shift in Infor's thinking about managing data, especially in these big distributed companies. Okay, so think of this as your shortcut, your quick guide to understanding why this whole post-go-live phase matters so much and why Infor's data mesh approach with that Albanero influence is, well, pretty significant. Let's get into it. Okay, so the system is live. Relief washes over everyone. Why is that feeling maybe a bit deceptive when you think about the data?
Well, the relief is totally natural, like I said. Teams pour so much energy into hitting that go-live date, but the danger is thinking, okay, data sorted. Neglecting data governance after that point is a bit like building this amazing house, but on foundations that might start to crumble.
And what are those first cracks you might see? If you ignore governance after go live, what are the sort of early warnings?
I think the first thing you probably notice is just a dip in data quality, almost like data entropy, if you will. Inconsistencies start showing up. Different teams entering the same customer data just slightly differently, duplicate records sneaking in, maybe key fields left blank. And that just erodes trust fast. You can't trust the data, then your reports, your analytics, they become unreliable, which leads to bad insights, maybe poor decisions. It's really a quick way to not get the value you expected from that big system investment.
Right. And anyone who's been through one of these implementations probably has war stories about those data inconsistencies and reporting nightmares. It rings true. So let's really dig into how Infor is using their data mesh for this, especially with the smarts they got from Albanero. What was it about Albanero? What was their core strength?
Albanero's focus was squarely on master data management, MDM. And MDM, it's not just about keeping lists tidy. It's about creating that single, reliable, consistent version of your most critical business data. We're talking customers, products, suppliers, the really core stuff.
Yeah.
And Albanero's platforms, they were designed specifically to have the sheer complexity and volume you find in big companies.
Okay, so it wasn't just buying tech. It was about bringing in that deep know-how on actually managing that crucial master data well in a large, complex organization.
Precisely. Albanero had this really mature philosophy around data governance and, critically, how you actually bake that into the technology itself. They really understood that for big, spread-out companies, that old-school, top-down, centralized data approach, it often just breaks down, doesn't scale. Their expertise gave Infor a kind of blueprint for a more distributed, more federated way of handling data control. And that's really the heart of Infor's data mesh.
Okay, so Incor's data mesh builds on this distributed, federated idea informed by Albanero. What does that actually look like for a company after go live? What are the key principles?
Well, the core concept is shifting data ownership and responsibility out to the teams who actually use the data every day, the domain experts. So maybe your sales team owns customer data, supply chain owns supplier data, HR owns employee data, and so on.
Makes sense.
Then the data mesh provides what they call a self-service infrastructure. It gives these teams the tools they need to manage their data well without being totally dependent on a central IT bottleneck. And the really key part is governance isn't an afterthought. It's not bolted on later. It's designed into the platform.
Oh, okay.
And to make it all work together across domains, there's something called a semantic layer. You can think of it as like a common dictionary and make sure everyone agrees on what data means. So different departments are actually talking about the same thing.
Governance by design. I like that. So, okay, we've survived go live. Why is this continuous governance, the kind the data mesh enables, so vital in the months, the years that follow?
Because business just doesn't stand still, right? It's constantly changing. Your business rules change. You launch new products. Maybe you restructure teams. You integrate with new partners, new systems. All of that creates this really dynamic and potentially messy data environment. If you don't have an active, adaptable governance framework, the data quality you worked so hard for during implementation will start to degrade. It's almost inevitable.
And this is where the Infor data mesh with that Albanero MDM engine inside really proves its worth post-go live. How does it help companies stay ahead of those ongoing data challenges?
It brings structure, but also flexibility to manage that constant change. By making sure your core master data customers, product suppliers, stays consistent across finance, supply chain, HR, operations, you keep that reliable single source of truth and empowering those line of business teams, the domain experts, with ownership within clear rules, obviously. That avoids the classic IT bottleneck.
Right, waiting for central IT to fix everything.
Exactly. And importantly, it starts treating your data less like just raw records and more like valuable data products. Things that are discoverable, trusted, and can be reused across the company. And because the governance is federated, built in, it just scales much better as the business grows and the data landscape gets more complex.
So it's a real shift from that old model maybe of top-down IT control over everything towards something more collaborative, where the people closest to the data manage it, but within agreed-upon guardrails.
That's a great way to put it. It's about finding that balance, empowering the teams who know the data best while still maintaining that essential enterprise-wide consistency and integrity.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense conceptually. Can we make it more concrete? Maybe walk through an example, say, in manufacturing after they've gone live?
Sure, yeah. Let's imagine a global manufacturer. They just went live with Infor Cloud Suite. They've got plants, say, North America, Europe, Asia, and each region has, a fair bit of autonomy in managing their local supply relationships. Now, before go live, they did a huge project, standardized their main vendor master, data names, addresses, tax IDs, the works, across all regions. That was a big win.
Okay, got it. Big initial cleanup. So systems live, initial data looks good. What kinds of problems might still pop up after go live if that ongoing governance isn't there?
Well, you could see local procurement teams starting to add supplier names in French or German or Mandarin, right?
Yeah.
Which makes getting a single global view of spending really hard. Or maybe one region negotiates specific payment terms with a key supplier, but that doesn't get updated properly in the central record. Or even with the initial deduplication, new vendors get added slightly differently in different plants, creating duplicates all over again. Little things? Maybe, but they add up.
Yeah, you end up with inconsistent purchasing data, payment problems. Maybe you can't even evaluate supplier performance properly across the board.
Exactly. Those small variations chip away at the value. So how would the data mesh with that Albanero MDM foundation help this manufacturer?
Right. How does it fix those kinds of issues?
Okay, so with the data mesh approach, each region, say Europe, still owns its local supplier data. They manage those relationships. However, the Albanero MDM part acts like a backbone. It enforces the global data standards they agreed on. So maybe the local team enters a name in German. But the system maps it automatically to the standardized global record for reporting. It enforces rules about required fields, like tax IDs. It also has features like version control, data lineage so you can see who changed what, when, and it helps spot and merge those potential duplicates that inevitably creep in. So it's really about giving the regions the flexibility they need locally, but ensuring that critical vendor data stays consistent and trustworthy globally.
So it genuinely sounds like the best of both worlds then. Local control where it makes sense, but with global consistency enforced by the system.
That's the goal, exactly. It avoids making the central system so rigid that it ignores local needs, but it also stops things descending into data chaos where every region is doing its own thing entirely.
That paints a really clear picture. Okay, as we start to wrap this up, if you had one critical message for someone listening who's just gone live, or maybe they're right on the verge of it, what would it be?
I think the absolute key takeaway is to realize that go live, it's not the end of the data story. In many ways, it's just the start of the ongoing journey. If you really want to get the full value from your new system and keep your data trustworthy, you absolutely need a proactive, continuous approach to data governance after go live. It's not optional anymore.
And it sounds like Infor's data mesh framework, especially with the Albanero acquisition boosting it, represents a more modern, more effective way to handle that crucial post-go-live phase for ERP and enterprise data generally.
Yeah, it really shifts the mindset away from those older, sometimes clunky governance models towards something more agile, more distributed, and actually built into how you manage data day to day.
So for you listening, if you've just been through that massive effort of a go-live, or you're psyching yourself up for it, the big question to ask is, what's our plan? What's our strategy for data governance after the switch is flipped? Because it really sounds like that's where the long-term success or the potential headaches truly lies.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the quality of the business decisions you make going forward, it's going to depend directly on the quality of the data you're using. And that data quality comes straight from how well you govern it, especially in those really important months and years right after a big implementation.
That's a really powerful thought to end on. In this data-driven world we're all in, the value you get tomorrow is directly tied to how seriously you take governing your data today. Thanks, this has been incredibly insightful, a great deep dive.